Mike, it's great to see you. We've been wanting to get you on the show for quite some time, and this is the perfect moment to do so. So thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Glenn, and thanks for all your work around these very entities and organizations and this spindly little government nexus with the NGO complex around internet censorship. I think your stewardship on that issue has been very impactful.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I feel the same way about yours. So let's get into the substance of this. I don't think I ever thought I would see the day when the U.S. government, the executive branch under elected president, would basically be waging open warfare on two of the most toxic and destructive arms of the U.S. imperial state, which is the National Endowment for Democracy and especially USAID. National Endowment for Democracy, I think the reasons that it's considered a CIA front, and certainly it is, are much more well documented. USAID is a little bit more subtle. Why have you become so focused on USAID as a toxic force inside the U.S. government?
Well, the closer you look at the National Endowment for Democracy, the closer you see that it really is the constant companion of USAID. USAID and NED share many joint programs that they jointly coordinate. For example, there's a program called CEPS. It's the Consortium for Excellence in Political Process Strengthening. Don't you know, all we want to do is strengthen your political processes in your country. So you need, so this is a joint program jointly operated by the U.S. State Department, USAID, and the National Endowment for Democracy. And the reason I refer to this program so often is because it played a central role in coordinating internet censorship. They have a countering disinformation arm, which is about launching the NGO complex funded by U.S. tax dollars to compel foreign governments to pass internal censorship laws, the sorts of laws that would be banned by the First Amendment. USAID funds the advocacy for those laws to be passed in foreign countries in order to censor the rise of populist politicians, where USAID has internally designated populism as a threat to democracy, so they get to use their democracy promotion programs to promote censorship of misinformation and political populism. But I come back to that to say that the State Department provides the policy direction. NED, the National Endowment for Democracy, does the technical on-the-ground implementation by directly liaising with all of the grantees, all the USAID grantees. But none of it would be possible without USAID. The other two parts are in a sense less pernicious. There's a great government document that I found assessing U.S. military strategy and attempt to reorganize it in 2022, where one of these three-star generals says in a survey that the military prefers to work with USAID over state in many matters because USAID actually does stuff, which is to say that USAID provides the money, and without money, nothing's possible. State can scrawl on a napkin or debate in a skiff all they like about what the policy should be, and they can think in abstractions about ways we should twist foreign governments' arms, or what we should do on certain negotiating postures with the U.S. ambassador talking to that counterpart president. But the fact is unless there are actual boots on the ground institutions in that country exerting influence, nothing gets done. And USAID is the mechanism for getting that done. So NED would really be nothing without USAID. And at this point, State Department would be totally crippled without USAID, which is why I find what's happening so fascinating, because for the past 2.5 years, I've been telling everyone who follows me that there is not an inch of daylight between USAID and the State Department. And USAID exists as an illusion to fool you into thinking that USAID is not the State Department. But it is. The only reason it's an independent agency is because that gives aid workers access to areas state can't access directly. U.S. diplomats can't just walk into civil society institutions in foreign countries or in conflict zones, can't just get into government buildings, can't just access the indigenous population. But if they're aid workers, the doors swing open. And so it exists as this front. But the fact is the CIA, the operations were initially scheduled to be or conceived to be parked under the State Department. The CIA was only created to be a plausibly deniable arm of state because state decided it would jeopardize the purpose of it to house it there directly. Well, it's the same thing. So it's a long way of saying what I find so funny is the current plan to close down the Ronald Reagan building and close down USAID HQ and move it into the State Department. The grand irony to me is that's what it was all along.
But I think it's such an important point, and I want to kind of zero in on this, and I don't know what the answer yet is. I'm very interested in hearing what you think, because on the one hand, you have this very elaborate, informed, historically based critique of how these agencies function and what their real purpose is, as you just laid out, as I've talked many times before about. They destabilize other countries. They're designed to kind of install this, this ability of the United States government to control other countries the way we want from Washington in a way that doesn't serve the country but serves a very narrow set of elites. Then on the other hand, you have the war that Elon Musk and secondarily, I guess, Donald Trump are now waging on USAID. And if you listen to Elon, he seems to be focused on this because he perceives this as an agency of things like waste, of funding woke programs that the United States government has no business funding. The thing about $50 million in Gaza for condoms, which wasn't really true, but we do fund programs like that elsewhere. $35,000 for a trans opera in Argentina or whatever the examples are. He seems to be talking about this more as about waste and funding left-wing woke projects. And I noticed actually over the weekend when this was happening on X, said, USAID, like the National Endowment for Democracy, has long been an arm of the CIA that serves no interests of American citizens and it can't die soon enough. And his response was, and they're not even good at it. And I kind of got to thinking, is his concern here that we need an agency that does that, but kind of without the waste and the left-wing agenda, but one that is, as you said, still nonetheless effective to allowing the U.S. government to enter all these parts of civil society under the pretext of not being part of the government? What do you think is motivating their attack on these agencies as opposed to why you dislike it? Or maybe they're the same.
I'm so glad you mentioned so many of these things, but it's sort of lit up a pinball machine in my mind of what area of that to attack. I guess, starting at the beginning, this, I don't know what's animating Elon in terms of, which aspect of the USAID octopus is most horrifying to him, and that may have tipped the camel's back, so to speak, around just shutting down the agency entirely. But to me, while I am wokeness is a real thing, and it's very real, and you know it when you see it. I have been saying for a very, very long time that what you see, it's very easy to mistake wokeness with blobness if you're not looking with a careful lens. And what I mean by that, I'll give a great example. So a few months ago, Max Blumenthal's outlet, the Gray Zone, published the internal leaked files from the International Republican Institute, which is the Republican arm of the National Endowment for Democracy. So it's Ned. And the State Department was displeased with the results of the Bangladesh election in 2018. The State Department favored candidate got walloped. And Ned, through the IRI, submitted a baseline assessment to the State Department of the best way to win the next election. And they decided that would not be possible without destabilizing Bangladesh and Bangladeshi culture and society in order to do the classic street riot, color revolution type work that Ned has been doing now for 4 decades. But in the baseline assessment, again, this is the Republican wing of Ned. Their baseline assessment said that basically the only groups, we lost the election overwhelmingly. The groups who are most upset at the current in-power government that we could capacity build with state and USAID funding are LGBT groups, 2 racial minority groups in Bangladesh, and young people and student groups in Bangladesh who like to listen to rap music. And so IRI poured State Department, U.S. taxpayer funds into transgender dance festivals, into a whole slew of sort of woke identity events around minority rights and funding minority rappers in Bangladesh. Ultimately culminating in throngs of street protests that forced the democratically elected prime minister to flee the country in a helicopter as a Clinton Global Initiative fellow was named the new president, and they've canceled elections. So all of this is to say that I don't think that the Republicans at IRI are woke. I think that you have tactical wokeness in service of statecraft, and this is what's motivating. Just today, you had all these news articles about DEI programs that USAID is spending hundreds of millions of dollars on around the world. Well, in 2009, the National Endowment for Democracy, this was actually written by Carl Gershman himself, the founder of NED, wrote a similar piece in 2009 about how to topple the government of Cuba. And what they assessed is that the Afro-Cuban population is the plurality ethnic faction in Cuba, but represents a very, very, very small part of Cuba's government. And there's racial animosities that could be inflamed. They did a baseline assessment of how they could angry up the Afro-Cuban population through DEI type programs. That wasn't the name in 2009, but they were diversity programs. And these all played a significant part in the 2021 summer protests in Cuba. These DEI wokeness programs are part of the ethnic balkanization and human rights predicates that are laid by the state in order to topple and control governments. And so that's the sort of thing that Trump likes to win on foreign policy. I would not be surprised if many of these DEI programs go away for a while, but if we need them, if there's a recalcitrant country and Trump wants to play hardball, I would not be surprised if some of these money spigots get turned on. But what I'm trying to convey here is I don't see this necessarily as waste, fraud, and abuse and them not being good at it. I do think it's wasteful. I do think that money's better spent on our own country rather than this level of foreign meddling. But the fact is that money serves a purpose. It is capacity building the cultural groups, the ethnic groups, the minority groups, the gender groups, the political groups. And so that's why you see strange things like dance festivals and music festivals and ethnic identity events and whatnot, because they're funding the fusion of networks that are then instrumentalized by the State Department and by extension USAID and NED.
Yeah, I think it's such an important point to understand U.S. foreign policy, and especially this desire to rule the world in ways that don't actually serve the country. If you look at, for example, when George Bush and Dick Cheney announced the bombing and invasion of Afghanistan, which leave aside the debate over whether that was wise, I remember very well they had Laura Bush publish an op-ed in the Los Angeles Times 2 weeks after 9/11 or so, basically touting the invasion as necessary for the liberation of women and women's rights in Afghanistan. And this is the Bush family that is very closely tied to the Saudi regime. I don't think they were motivated in their foreign policy by a desire to liberate women, but it can kind of cover. Same thing with we're going to Iraq to liberate the Iraqi people. And now you have, all kinds of expenditures in Ukraine on LGBT groups to try and turn Ukraine into a kind of toward the influence of the United States. And so often this kind of identity politics and this woke agenda has been depicted as this left-wing cultural war cause, which inside the United States it might be. But as you say, there's this very important component that it plays in how we sell our foreign policy to Western populations, to our own population, and then to divide these other countries in ways that are instrumental for us. Is that, I guess that's what I was trying to get at, was I'm not sure that Elon Musk is thinking about that so much, because I'm not even sure that he would be bothered by that. And that's why that comment that he made, well, they're not really good at it, meaning if they were kind of better at maybe I would support them. But I also just want to add here in terms of Elon's
Bangladesh.
What's that?
It just worked in Bangladesh in September, 4 months ago.
It worked in Ukraine. It worked in Ukraine too, to bring these issues to Kiev, to make Kiev much more pro-Western. But I do also want to ask you, because I think what motivated Elon as well, at least in terms of the escalation of his rhetoric, this war that he waged on USAID all weekend, part of that was because, whether you like it or not, Donald Trump has deputized Elon Musk to head this agency that's designed to eliminate waste, as the White House sees it. Wasteful spending, unnecessary spending. And so when the people that are part of this effort that Donald Trump has created after he won the election went to USAID, and it's happened in other agencies too, you see almost this physical resistance, like, how dare you come into our realm? You don't run us. You're just the elected part of the government. We're this agency that exists independent of you. Where does this mentality come from that they have this right to pursue their own agenda independent of any elected officials or elected parts of the government?
Well, the entire agency exists as a carefully constructed lie. And just like James Clapper and John Brennan and Leon Panetta, these are the holders of the great American closet of skeletons of state secrets. And you don't just hand that over to a random taxi cab driver because 51% of the population elected him because he does funny TikTok dances. What I'm trying to say here is if you remember the recalcitrance around sharing intelligence with President Trump, both in his 2016 presidential run and then again in the lead up to the 2024 election, I think what's happening at USAID is essentially an echo of that, which is that USAID is supposed to be untouchable. I mean, virtually, there's no USAID project on God's green earth that is honest. If we are irrigating the rivers, or irrigating the agricultural fields in a country, it's because we're trying to control the territory there. If we are working on the water supply, it's because we're trying to control the rivers. If we're working on famine relief, it's because we're trying to control the food supply and make inroads into the indigenous populations there. If we are helping them write their constitution and go through democratic legal reform, it's so that we can control their laws. Every single thing USA does is dual purpose. It's dual purpose by charter. They're only allowed to do the things that advance U.S. foreign policy interest. And we just put a little bow on top of it, and we say, in the process, we're making the world a better place. Because it's going to these humanitarian groups who are administering this thing, which in the process will help U.S. foreign interests. But the fact is the worst scandals in American statecraft in the 1960s and 70s and maybe early 80s were the CIA. In recent years, the worst scandals in American statecraft have been USAID, from funding the Wuhan lab to growing heroin in Afghanistan and irrigating the poppy fields, to setting up a fake Twitter in Cuba with an explicit USAID document saying that the plan is to have algorithms favoring sports, news, and hurricane updates. And then once we have enough people, switch to get them to hate their government and topple their government and take to the streets in smart riots, to them even using public health HIV prevention clinics as undercover for USAID workers doing intelligence work to get people to overthrow their governments. And this gets me to another point that I'd feel remiss if I didn't say, because I've been thinking about it so long and haven't really had a venue to just kind of open say it. But which is this?
Open and say everything that you want, because this is the venue for it.
You recall how in 2011 the CIA was busted running a fake vaccine clinic in Pakistan. Do you remember this?
Yeah, to find Osama bin Laden was their claim, and they undercut all kinds of confidence for years. Yeah, that was the claim, was they wanted to register these people in the hope of getting connection with the population, but it was a fake vaccine program. Vaccine activists were angry because they had worked so hard to build confidence in vaccines, and it turned out that it was a whole fake plan and designed to get the United States to get data on Pakistanis.
Yes, right. Had nothing to do with David Petraeus' counterinsurgency manual calling to collect 85% of the country's biometrics. Yep, it was just Osama bin Laden. But the fact is they were caught flat busted in that situation with a fake vaccine drive, fake vaccine clinics, and that was 2011. It took them 16 months to issue written statement, a non-binding written statement that they would no longer use vaccination work or public health facilities to do intelligence work out of. So we have a non-binding written statement from the CIA that took them 16 months of fighting it to issue, to say that we will no longer use our public health facilities as a front for CIA work. Well, given that USAID is CIA, there is no daylight between those two organizations. That is why you see the likes of AOC and Chuck Schumer saying that if Elon Musk gets access to the highly classified documents at USAID HQ, it will put U.S. national security at grave risk. Well, what is a humanitarian aid NGO sponsor doing with so many troves of such highly classified state secrets that it will massively endanger all of U.S. national security if somebody outside of USAID reads it? That's the sort of thing that you typically would reserve for a CIA or NSA level document. But the fact is that's USAID for you. But USAID is not under that obligation, that this non-binding. We don't know that when CIA pledged to not use public health facilities for intelligence work, that the baton wasn't just handed off to its identical twin cousin, USAID. And I have an open question. When you look at the fact, for example, that HIV clinics in Cuba and the Western Hemisphere were being used by USAID as cover for color revolution work, formal cover. In fact, in their own documents, they said that the HIV program would be the perfect excuse because Cuban counterintelligence would never think to look there. Well, how many other public health facilities operated by USAID are doing the same thing in Africa, in South America, in Eastern Europe, in Central Asia? And so I guess what I'm getting at here is turning over that level of scandal. It's bad enough if Americans know it, but it becomes an international incident. I mean, one of the things that I ran into at State, Glenn, which you might find interesting, is when we were trying to convince foreign countries to move off of Huawei, what they would turn, because it's back channeled by the CCP and Chinese intelligence, we would get hit with a counter argument. Well, you want us to use American IT architecture, but Snowden. We read the Snowden files.
Yeah, that was part of the big story that we published, was that they were, backdooring that same technology. At the same time, they were telling people not to use the Chinese companies because they were backdooring it. We were backdooring. In fact, we were intercepting the devices that people around the world ordered, opening the devices the FBI was, and putting in the technology that would allow us to backdoor that equipment. And of course, that created skepticism when we were trying to convince them not to use OI and other Chinese companies.
Right. So, the point that I'm driving at here is these things. The Snowden story is very easy to look at as an American, and the concern that I think folks in the blob, folks in the national security complex and the international relations complex have is, it's if only Americans learned how bad USAID was and what it was really doing. For example, if that story I just mentioned in Bangladesh, if Americans had full access to everything that USAID and its spindle groups were doing in all these other countries, that's one conversation. That's bad enough, but maybe tolerable. But the problem is when other countries learn about this, it becomes a diplomatic incident. It becomes something that harms our standing with partnered nations, and with it makes neutrals want to turn to Russia and China instead of the United States because we look like the bad guy. It harms our standing at the UN. It allows foreign countries who may be hostile or neutral to us to hold up these scandals in front of the UN and move international favor against the U.S., which then can have trickle-down effects on our national security, our economic engagements in various countries. It can sever trust in countries that we're trying to court, and that then harms the economic interests of all the different private sector companies who draft behind the battering ram of American statecraft. You have everything from the tech companies to the oil companies, to to you name it. You know,
but let me ask you about that though, because that I think is central to this whole discussion. I mean, first of all, I think there's a lot of recognition of what the real function of Ned is and USAID is outside of the United States. In fact, Russia expelled USAID because Hillary Clinton's State Department was funding all those agitations and anti-Putin protest movements on the street. But then even just, over the last couple of days, you have the president of El Salvador, who's pretty much tied to the international populist right, saying nobody wants USAID in our countries. It just, destabilizes it. It's designed to divide, as you were saying. But then you have the president of Mexico, who's, very much on the left, saying pretty much the same thing. That these, are not here to help. They're quite the opposite. So in some way, I think it's almost reverse. It's like the world knows this. It's Americans that don't. And that's true of so many things. But what I want to ask you is, let me just ask you about the defense of people who defend USAID, including all these congressional Democrats who are marching in front of there as though they were defending something noble, this CIA front. That's what the Democratic Party is now. They would say, and I think defenders of the blob, the people on the blob would say, if you don't exert this influence in these other countries, especially with the pretense of helping, we're building an irrigation system for you, we're doing this, we're doing that, even though we have ulterior motives, if we withdraw from that, if we defund that, China is just going to go in and do it, or the Russians will do it, or the Iranians will do it, and we will end up harming ourselves. What about that argument?
No, there's a lot here, and fundamentally, my hesitation in responding is because I don't know exactly what's motivating the high-level thinking on this, because the answer to that question depends on what happens next. Because technically, USAID HQ is set to shut down if Trump and Musk win on this. But the plan is to fold it under the State Department. And, I posted this on X just a little bit ago. But, the fundamental thrust of it was killing USAID does not end USAID. Killing USAID as an organization does not end USAID as a function. If the State Department is now inheriting the USAID's portfolio, so USAID is essentially going to be, the State Department is basically going to inherit I think I used the phrase, USAID herpes complex attached. It's basically going to be State Department with USAID herpes attached now, unless the actual programs are cut, the grants are cut. In a sense, I was joking to a friend earlier, sort of lovingly tongue in cheek, but that maybe I was joking that I don't really mean this, but that maybe this whole thing was Marco Rubio's idea, so that he could be the most powerful Secretary of State in modern history, running not just the State Department, but USAID as well. Because
let me stop you there for a second, because I don't know if you saw this, but we have Rubio answering reporters' questions about how he's now the acting director of USAID, and here's what he has to say. I'm interested in your reaction to that. Let's go ahead and play that.
USAID, what's happening at USAID, and how does that affect you? Well, look, my frustration with USAID goes back to my time in Congress. It's a completely unresponsive agency. It's supposed to respond to policy directives of the State Department, and it refuses to do so. So the functions of USAID, there are a lot of functions of USAID that are going to continue, that are going to be part of American foreign policy, but it has to be aligned with American foreign policy. I said very clearly during my confirmation hearing that every dollar we spend and every program we fund, that will be aligned with the national interest of the United States. And USAID has a history of sort of ignoring that and deciding that there's somehow a global charity separate from the national interest. These are taxpayer dollars. And so I'm very troubled by these reports that they've been unwilling to cooperate with people who are asking simple questions about what does this program do, who gets the money, who are our contractors, who's funded. And that sort of level of insubordination makes it impossible to conduct the sort of mature and serious review that I think foreign aid writ large should have. We're spending taxpayer money here. These are not donor dollars. These are taxpayer dollars. And we owe the American people the assurances that every dollar we are spending abroad is being spent on something that furthers our national interests. And so far, a lot of the people that work at USAID have just simply refused to cooperate.
So what is your reaction to that? And I don't know how well you could hear, but that gets to the distinction I was worried about, which is what they're really after here are the things that just don't matter. You know, the actual just sort of like charitable stuff that some ideologue inside USAID decided to fund, but that they do want to continue the kinds of programs you were describing that in their minds do advance U.S. interest in a way that that might involve bringing divisiveness to various countries. Although then again, if you listen to other things Marco Rubio is saying, he does seem to think we're overextended and over-involved in the world. So I'm just kind of curious what your reaction to his perception is.
Well, I don't think USAID is ideological at all. I actually think they are the most cold, calculating, ideologically agnostic organization in the U.S. federal government. And to what Marco Rubio said there, that's the reason you park it at USAID. It's because what if the in-power administration at the State Department doesn't want something to be done or has a slightly different opinion on it? USAID allows basically a rogue group within the intelligence community to continue to carry out operations under the banner of being totally independent and siloed away. But I will note that under the Biden administration, before the major falling out towards the end with Kamala Harris and the sort of DNC civil war that broke up what was a total party unanimity with the whip hand in Congress holding congressional Democrats as a total block, as well as at the executive level. But if folks recall, USAID was born in the early 1960s, 1961, 62. It was never on the National Security Council until just 3 years ago under Joe Biden. Joe Biden considered USAID to be so important that he put Samantha Powers on the National Security Council, to directly coordinate, CIA and State Department interagency activity. And so the point that I'm getting at here is there has long been a fight between the CIA and Congress over oversight. This was the heart, for example, of the start of Bill Barr's career, when he started his career in the CIA and went to Knight Law School while working at the CIA. And then his first real substantive CIA job was as the CIA's liaison to Congress to block congressional investigations into CIA malfeasance during Iran-Contra during the early Reagan years. The CIA gives out internal awards around operational security, and there's weird histories with some of that involving obfuscating congressional efforts to actually get access and oversight to the CIA, even on the House and Senate Intelligence Committees. So USAID is able to block that out. USAID is basically doing the same sort of obfuscations that the CIA used to do, but USAID is where the operations of CIA happen. CIA mostly plays the liaison role for operations, but they have no assets to play with unless USAID capacity built them.
Yeah, I think what all this reveals, at least as much as anything, is precisely the fact that there is a massive part of our federal government that operates completely unto itself. They perceive their entitlement as operating outside of democratic accountability. And the fact that they are so resistant to any control by the executive branch, to any control by the State Department, that the Democratic Party acts as though this is some grave assault on the national interest to put them inside the State Department when they're operating as an arm of the federal government anyway. I think it really reveals the fact that not only is there this deep state that has been there to resist Donald Trump and the outcome of the election, but also partnering with the Democratic Party to do it. And whatever Elon Musk's motives are, and I'm not sure how well thought out they are at this point, but whatever they are, anything that just kind of crushes that structure and starts bringing it out into the spotlight and letting people understand what it really is and how it functions, I consider to be a positive thing. And your work has been as instrumental as anyone's in helping people understand that. So I'm so thrilled that we finally have you on the show. It's been something we've been talking about for a while. Just sometimes you need to wait for the right moment. And we'd love to have you back on. Thanks so much for taking the time to talk to us.
Thanks, Glenn.
All right, have a great evening. Bye-bye.